people can join also after, no problem.
All right. Okay. Now the session is being live streamed. So good time to start, I hope, Your Highness.
Yes, you can start. Go.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And thank you so much. It's lovely to be back. I will quickly start sharing the screen so we could begin without further ado. And just a moment. Okay, so I hope the screen is visible to everybody. So, okay, if you have any questions,
Yes.
I can take it
Yes,
towards
it is.
All right, great.
It is visible.
Lovely. So we can take the questions towards the end of the session so I could speak seamlessly and my train of thought is not interrupted. So if you do have questions, if something occurs to you, just post in the comment box and I will get back to it at a later point. So, okay, continuing with the history of English language and literature, where we had left off previously. If you go through the previous lectures that are now available on YouTube of my sessions, you will see that we were discussing the time, the post Queen Elizabeth I time, the time of King James I and then Charles I. I discussed the whole history of how, King Charles I, he got himself into a lot of controversy by, taking all the decisions of the court solely by himself and neglecting all his ministers. And he took some really, he took some measures that were really unpopular with the ministers and even the population of that time, which led to his execution, which led to a very, there was a divided stance in the population. Some people were in favor of Charles the first, and some people were totally against of what he was doing. So the crowd was divided into royalists and anti-royalists. And how Charles the One, because James, he was the successor of King James the First, who was also King James the Sixth of Scotland. So what King Charles the First, his successor, tried to do with England and Scotland, because he was heading both the nations, both the regions. So what he tried to do during his time, he tried to consolidate the two areas, and he tried to bring the Presbyterian Church into the Anglican fold. Presbyterian church is different and the Anglican church is different. So what he tried to do, he tried to superimpose the Anglican ideology on the Presbyterian, on the Scottish people, which did not go down well with them. And there was this, protests and which actually fanned the entire and anti-royalist sentiment among people. And there was war, and King Charles I was beheaded, and that was a historic moment for Britain. Why? Because Britain then went into the control of Oliver Cromwell. So it was not during that period, during the interregnum, Britain did not have a monarch, right? It was brief, very brief though, because later Charles II was brought back to the throne of England, but that only happened after some time. So during that period, there was stringent control over theater. Theater was closed, so there was this. A very strict time, and Milton is a product of that. Milton and even his writings is actually a product of his time. So we will. So if you have to understand Milton, this is the lecture based on John Milton, the great English poet. So before I start explaining about Milton's life, and even Milton's works, I would want you to understand that Milton's work and Milton's life cannot be divorced with the political upheaval that was happening in the background. You have to bring that into context whenever you're reading Milton, because tacitly or very explicitly, he does mention politics. So politics is like the bedrock of understanding his compositions, right? So a little video on him. I found a very interesting video on YouTube that might, lay a foundation. And yes, John Milton, the best known work of John Milton is Paradise Lost, and it is the only Christian epic, a very important one from the point of understanding of English literature. So before I take up an explanation of Paradise Lost and what was happening with other texts of Milton as well and how they're associated to the contemporary politics, a little bit about his life.
Man's first disobedience, the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death unto the world, and all our woe was loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heaven and earth rose out of chaos. Those opening lines of John Milton's Paradise Lost set out the long-pondered argument of a poet who, by the time he came to write them, was, you might say, a voluntary exile. Milton was now in his 50s, stripped of all the political responsibilities he had held during Cromwell's rule, stripped of most of his property, fined, protected from worse revenges by the efforts of a few loyal friends. And he was blind, totally blind, able to compose only in his head and to dictate his words. This was the man who, as an undergraduate at Christ's College, Cambridge, in the 1620s, had been so beautiful that he was known as the lady of his college, who, supported by his father's belief in him, studied and traveled on his own for years, preparing for the great work he knew he had it in him to write, but who, in 1660, at the restoration of Charles II, saw behind him the wreck of his life as a valued counsellor of the state, the deaths of 2 wives, and as for his writing, mainly the reputation of being a dangerously radical pamphleteer. But Milton knew he was great. He knew it was a matter of time, study, and perseverance. While he was still young, he wrote to a friend, "You ask me what I am thinking of. So may the good deity help me of immortality. And what am I doing? Growing my wings."
So yes, Milton did gain immortality through his works, and he did gain wings from the many languages, from the many disciplines he was, honing his skills in. So, a little bit of, just a moment, the slide is not progressing. Yes. So a little bit about Milton's life. A lot has been said in the brief section in the video that I had played. The video is available on YouTube, and I can post the link later after the class and you can watch it. Otherwise, it's a very long one. So I stopped in between. So yes, one of the preeminent writers in the English language. So, if you are studying English language and literature, you must know the name of John Milton. He is that important to the understanding of the history of English literature. And he was born in London. He was the son of a scrivener, also by the name of John Milton. So Milton's father's prosperity provided his eldest son with a private tutor, Thomas Young. Now, his tutor, Thomas Young, he was a Scottish Presbyterian. Note this, because that is where all the radical ideas are coming from. And this is all rooted in Milton's childhood, right? So Thomas Young was his private tutor, and research even suggests that Young's influence served as the poet's introduction to religious radicalism. So yes, he had a lot of radical thoughts in terms of politics and even religion, something of which you would find reflected, some of which you would find reflected in Paradise Lost as well, right? So he served as a civil servant for the Commonwealth of England under its Council of State and later under Oliver Cromwell. So he was an anti-royalist, and when King Charles I was executed, he was appointed as a civil servant during that interregnum period, and he was a Tory. You know how there was a division in the crowd, Whigs and Tories, and Tories were actually, people who were largely Catholics, and they were in minority, right? And so John Milton too was a Tory, and he wrote at a time of religious and political upheaval, like I just said. And his best known work is the epic poem Paradise Lost that came out in 1667. And an important feature about Paradise Lost, an important feature of Paradise Lost is that it is written in blank verse. And it is widely considered to be one of the greatest works of English literature ever, right? It is that good. And now it is important to note that John Milton was quite an erudite personality. He was a polyglot. He knew several languages. He was conversant in English, Latin, Italian. He had achieved international renown within his lifetime. And he also added Old English to his linguistic repertoire in the 1650s while researching his history of Britain. So, there were many words that he brought into English language. There were several words that were coined by him. And, he even acquired proficiency in Dutch later in his life. So he knew several languages. He had interest in several disciplines, all of which you would find, hints of every single thing here and there when you read his texts. He read both ancient and modern works of theology, philosophy, history, politics, literature, science in preparation for a prospective political career. So he was looking forward to a political career since a long, long time, and he was preparing for the same. And he was, he was preparing for the same by having a good, deep knowledge about these disciplines. And another celebrated work that came from Milton after Paradise Lost is Areopagitica that came out in 1644. And why is this work important? Because this work was written in condemnation of pre-publication censorship. You know how censorship has always been an issue when it comes to journalism, when it comes to, back in those days, journalism was not like the journalism that we have today. It was earlier, it was all pamphleteering and everything. And how certain kings, certain monarchs would put into action some measures, they would take some steps to make sure that seditious works are not into publication, not published, that actually tarnishes the image of the people in power. So he wrote in condemnation of this control, because that is not freedom of speech. And so this is amongst history's most influential and impassioned defenses of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So this is an important text from Milton. And like I said, he also introduced new words coined from Latin and ancient Greek both to the English language. And he contributed roughly 630 new words to English, which includes words like pandemonium. This word pandemonium you would find in Paradise Lost, because this is the place where all the fallen angels, they gather and they discuss their future plan, how to overthrow God and how to in a way corrupt the latest creation of God, that was Adam and Eve, right? So it is in that place, pandemonium, that damned place, where in hell, where this whole conversation, a meeting occurs between different devils of how to go forward with the plan of corrupting the God's greatest creation. And then there were words like earth-shaking, love-lorn, fragrance, and even the phrase by hook or by crook, etc. Several such words, they have been coined by Milton himself, right? So it wasn't just Shakespeare, it was Milton also, who have contributed to the language, right? And he was revered, very, very revered, not only in his time, but also by the poets who later came after him, like William Blake, Wordsworth, Thomas Hardy, etc. And he wrote poetry mostly for private circulation and launched a career as pamphleteer and, what is this word? Just a moment, publicist. Pamphleteer and publicist under the increasingly personal rule of Charles I and its breakdown into constitutional confusion and war. So he was writing, poems that were laced with a sense of revolution. They were seditious in nature, given that Charles I was in power back in that time, and all the chaos that entailed after his execution. So it was a very, very tumultuous time when you consider politics, right? So, and he was writing poetry during that time, and he was circulating it privately. And the shift in accepted attitudes in government placed him in public office under the Commonwealth of England, right? So what is this shift of attitude? That, okay, we are not going to take, whatever the king has to say just because, he's the king of England. So this was the attitude shift. Earlier, it was like an absolute control by the monarch, but it did not go well down with the people, with several people, and they revolted. And, a military rule, a very, temporary military rule came into being very briefly, because then later Charles II was restored, and that era was brought to an end, the interregnum, the Commonwealth era of England, right? So the restoration of the 1660 of Charles II, the son of Charles I, he went into exile after his father was executed, and then he was brought back to the throne of England in 1660. Now, when Charles II was restored, when monarchy was restored, Milton was deprived of his political position. And by that time, he was also completely blind, because he was suffering from this condition called progressive myopia, where your vision, it keeps deteriorating, and at one point of time, you become completely blind. So this was the condition that Milton was going through. And he was completely deprived of his public platform. But this period saw him complete most of his major works of poetry. So even though he had lost all his political power, this was the time when, he accelerated all the poetical compositions that were actually pending. He was able to give time and give, his voice, his ideas. It was very circumstantial, because now he was seeing himself as the fallen angel, somebody who was looking forward to a revolution. He was at a position of power, very briefly though, and then he went down on that political ladder. So it was very unsettling for him. It did not, it was his unpalatable truth. And this emotion you find reflected even in the way Paradise Lost has been composed. So Milton's views developed from his very extensive reading, as well as travel and experience from his student days of the 1620s to the English Civil War. So, he was traveling a lot, he was meeting a lot of people, he was reading extensively, he was completely immersed into academic, undertakings. And with the parliamentary victory in the Civil War, Milton used his pen in defense of the Republican principles represented by the Commonwealth. So, he took his pen and he used it for the purpose of revolution, that how, the nation had, it broke free from, the tyrannical control of King Charles I. And he was elated when the Commonwealth period had begun. And Milton held the appointment of Secretary for Foreign Tongues to the Commonwealth Council of State until 1660, right? Till the time the Commonwealth period was still on, he continued to hold that position. But once monarchy was restored, everything was lost. And by 1652, Milton had become totally blind, and the cause of his blindness is debated, but bilateral retinal detachment or glaucoma are most likely. There are several theories that suggest that it could have been glaucoma as well, and his blindness forced him to dictate his verse and prose to different people who could work for him as scribes, who copied them out for him. And one of those scribes was Andrew Marvell, another important poet of that time, right? And by this time of his death in 1674, 74 is the time he died, Milton was impoverished and on the margins of English intellectual life, yet famous throughout Europe and unrepentant for his political choices. He took his stand. He stood firm on the political stand that he had taken till the time he died. He did not abandon those principles. He was a person of principles. He was revolutionary, and he held them very closely. He held those principles till the time of his death. Just a moment. Okay, now a brief look at his works. He wrote Psalms. He wrote Licidus, El Allegro, Il Penseroso, Arcades, Comas, Areopagitica, Paradise Lost. He wrote several grammar textbooks. He wrote Art of Logic. He wrote History of Britain. He wrote Of True Religion. These were his essays. He wrote on Shakespeare in 1630, and then, the compilation of his poems that are, referred to as 1645 poems. These are his most important works. Then, he was a political person, and he was also into political writing. And Milton's political thought may be best categorized according to respective periods in his life and times. And the years 1641 to 42 were dedicated to church politics and the struggle against episcopacy. Charles I trying to take over the Presbyterian Church by introducing Anglican Bible into Presbyterian Church, which did not go down well with the Scottish people. And Scottish people revolted against Charles I. That was the time when religion was quite a matter of debate and contestation. So then from 1649 to 54, in the aftermath of the execution of Charles I, and in polemic justification of the regicide is the killing of the king, regicide, and the existing parliamentarian regime. So he wrote in support of that regicide and the existing parliamentarian regime, that how, this regime was important for the growth of England, and why bringing such a regime was the right thing to do, right? And then from 1659 to 60, he foresaw the restoration, the coming back of King Charles II, and he wrote to head it off, that this must not be done. Monarchy must not be restored. This is what his political stance was. And a few of his political works of Reformation touching church discipline in England, followed by of prelatical episcopacy. So if you see, if you're sitting for competitive examinations, and if you see that, a name appears in front of your, if there's ever a question asking, what are the works associated to John Milton? If there is something that is about, religion and politics and freedom of speech, you'll be able to relate those themes with Milton's life. The reason I'm discussing all this with you. So just a brief reading of, some minor works can also do the trick sometimes, because often in examinations you're asked about the minor works of major poets. So this is how it is, right? So these are a few texts by Milton. The reason of church government urged against prelacy, the tenure of kings and magistrate, iconoclasts, defensio pro populo, Anglicano, also known as the first defense, then defensio secunda, that is second defense, defensio per se in 1655, a treatise of civil power, letter to a friend concerning the ruptures of the Commonwealth. So, these are some keywords: Commonwealth, religion, right? Defense, iconoclasts. If these words, they are coming somewhere in the question, they definitely have some association with John Milton. If he is, if the question relates to him. So, right. So letter to a friend concerning the ruptures of the Commonwealth, proposals of certain expedients for the preventing of a civil war, now feared, written in November 1659. See how civil war now feared, 1659, because 1660 is the time when King Charles II is brought back. So he is foreseeing that time. The ready and easy way to establishing a free Commonwealth, how to solve this Commonwealth problem, how to solve the political problems that England is facing at that time. So he would write about those in his essays. Okay, so another important work, this is a work from his initial days of political and poetic career, on the morning of Christ's nativity, right? So this actually is a nativity ode that was written by Milton in 1629, and it was published in his Poems of Mr. John Milton that came out in 1645, right? And this is the poem where you'll find a description of Christ's incarnation and his overthrow of earthly and pagan powers. And this poem, it connects incarnation with Christ's crucifixion as well. So, there is a discussion of, even though it is about Christ's nativity, the birth of Christ, there is also, the poet has an existing knowledge of what happens. Obviously, everybody has that knowledge that Christ was crucified. And there is this brief mention of his life, there is a brief hint about the way he lived his life and how that life is actually compared with the poet's own life. The poet sees Christ as a revolutionary figure, and he associates his own role with the Christ's role about bringing a change in the world. This is how he saw himself and his work, Milton. So there is this, if you see there are political, if you see closely, you'll find political undercurrents even in this religious poem, right? And the poem's chronology constantly, it jumps forward and it pulls back as Milton imagines everything that Christ will bring, then recalls that he is still an infant in a manger, right? So even though he has just been born, the poet talks about his great achievements, why he came to earth, why the Son of God came to earth, and he brought about so many, he in a way revolutionized the existence of humans on earth, the descendants of Adam and Eve, how he's responsible for that salvation. He came for that and he sacrificed his life for that. So this is something that even Milton, he is looking forward to a political and religious career of this sort, something that brings change, a positive change, a change that is good for everybody. And his radical thoughts are similarly revolutionary, are revolutionary just as Christ's own revolution was, in a way, in a manner of saying. So, his poem looks forward to what a revolution against King Charles I might bring. One of the enduring themes of the Nativity Ode and the rest of Milton's work is whether revolution can bring about change or not, right? So it is about change. It is about, being hopeful that, good things can happen. If you push for the right changes, those changes will manifest in the society, right? And in Milton's retelling of the nativity scene, the birth of Christ is a model for revolutionaries. and a roadmap for his own life's work, right? So this is what the Nativity Ode is, very political. And then another important work from the initial days of his poetic career is also Lycidas. It is a pastoral elegy. It was dedicated to a friend by the name of Edward King. Milton used to study at Cambridge, and Edward King used to be his friend there. But Edward, he died. How? He drowned when his ship sank in the Irish Sea off the coast of Wales in August 1637. So Milton lost his friend to a shipwreck, and it is in his memory that these lines were composed that you'll find as Lycidas, the poem Lycidas. And in this poem, Lycidas, that is actually Edward King, Milton follows the tradition of memorializing a loved one through pastoral poetry, which was actually a practice that had origins in ancient Greek, Sicily, where, Roman culture and, elements from the Christian Middle Ages would be taken up to remember the bygone, which, was a part of Renaissance. So, Lycidas then is in keeping with the modes and tropes of Renaissance poetry, right? And the speaker in this poem, he accuses God that why, God, why? Why did you so unjustly take away such a great person? He would have contributed so much to the world, but that a promising journey was cut short because of that shipwreck. And he says that how selfless King was, and his premature death ended a career that would have unfolded in stark contrast to the majority of the ministers and bishops of the Church of England, whom the speaker condemns as depraved, materialistic, and selfish. So, church was pretty corrupt back in those times. And Milton hated many people because of the corruption, the pervasive corruption during that time. And Edward King was looking forward to a religious career, to, a career in the church. And that career, that prospect was cut short. It was jeopardized because of his untimely premature death. So it is a remembrance of his friend, Lycidas, Edward King, right? So he very fondly remembers, and he says that, the way I am remembering Edward today through this poem, I hope when I die, I'm also remembered in the same fashion, in the same style, and somebody too will take pains to write a poetry on me. This is how he's forward looking to his own greatness, to the same response that the way he has responded to the death of Edward King, that same admiration, that same longing, that nostalgia, right? So this was Lycidas. And then El Allegro and Il Penseroso, they translate as the happy man and the melancholy man, or the melancholic man, right? So the happy man, this poem, El Allegro, it is about a very happy mood. The poem is set on a hilltop, and everything is just perfect. People are living in harmony. There's greenery everywhere. And the melancholy man, it's all about a person in a cave and darkness and feeling melancholic all the time. So they are complementary poems, and they're often referred to as companion poems. And they are pastoral in nature because you find references to outdoors, nature. And there is this bright side of nature and even the dark side of it. So, there is a contrast, and yet they're read together. And that is what the two poems represent: a happy mood and a melancholic mood, or not melancholic as per se, but, a very, a person when he is brooding, and a more mature, when, a person acquires a mature outlook towards life, he becomes more mellowed. So, this happy man is more youthful, and that melancholic man, and, the emotion that is expressed in Il Penseroso, it is more towards maturity, right? So these poems were published in 1645 poems, and they serve as a balance to each other because they are contrast, and yet, they talk about two extreme moods, and they're put together. So, they balance out each other in that sense. So Milton follows a classical hymn model, so what is this classical hymn model? It begins with an invocation. So, in The Happy Man, in El Allegro, it is the invocation of mirth, happiness, or, in Il Penseroso, it is Euphrosyne and her defined parentage. And Il Penseroso begins with invocation of melancholy, right? So this is how certain figures, classical figures have been evoked, certain mood is evoked in the beginning of the poem. And the poem presents a contrasting view of the two lifestyles that a poet might choose. Either he can just go out and, be careless and do nothing and be totally free of all the political, religious responsibilities that life has to offer, and that life actually superimposes. And then there is this melancholic man who has taken upon himself the responsibility to revolutionize the world, to be in a room reading all the time and trying to bring that change. So it feels like he's describing Milton is describing his own conflicting self through the two of the poems. And the two poem brings a complete balance between the two. You have to balance out between the two moods. You cannot be completely divorced from all the responsibilities of the world, and yet you can also not be totally embroiled in responsibilities all the time, because that's going to strip your life of all the happiness that is important. So what I feel, one must choose a middle ground. So, in El Allegro, you will find a depiction of day at the countryside, and both poems take opposite side in a debate about whether it is better to live a carefree life or a contemplative life, deep brooding, contemplative life. So some critics argue that the poems follow the life of one person from youth in El Allegro to old age in Il Penseroso. So, one is a poem about mirth, happiness, playfulness. The other is about all the seriousness and, deep thinking and everything. So completely contrast. I'm not going to take a lot of, there is obviously a lot to read in the poems, but I cannot take more details because otherwise I'll be just sitting and discussing these poems alone. So quickly moving forth, Comas. Another important work, Comas, a masque presented at Ludlow Castle, 1634. It is actually a masque in honor of chastity, and it is composed by John Milton. Comas, a masque presented at, that is a repetition, sorry. So it was first presented by Michaelmas, 1634, before John Egerton, who was the first Earl of Bridgewater, right? And it was in celebration of Earl's new post as Lord President of Wales. So, it was a short play sort of a thing. And virtuousness and temperance and chastity are celebrated through this masque. And the plot actually, it deals with, it talks about two brothers and their sister, simply called, that sister is simply called the lady, and they're lost on a journey through the woods. And the lady becomes fatigued, and the brothers wander off in search of, sustenance, that somehow they could make the best of that situation. And while alone, the lady, she encounters the debauched Comas, a character inspired by god of revelry, who is disguised as a villager and claims he will lead her to her brothers. He promises that, okay, you're sitting here alone, let me take you to where your brothers are. So, the lady is deceived by his amiable countenance. Comas is quite a handsome man, and she is deceived by him, the lady, and the lady follows him, only to be captured, brought to his pleasure palace, and victimized by his necromancy. So, the reiteration of that trope, damsel in distress. Somebody, a man has taken her away, and now her chastity is under threat, and she's made to sit on an enchanted chair, and with gums of gluttonous heat. So there is a reference of sexuality here, and she is immobilized. She cannot move. And Comas speaks to her while with one hand he holds a necromancer's wand, and with the other he offers a vessel with a drink that would overpower her. So she is completely, there is this scene where he tries to enchant her. He tries to cast a spell on her, but Comas, and what happens? Comas urges the lady to not be coy, given to all those temptations, and drink from his magical cup, representing obviously sexual pleasure and intemperance. But she, repeatedly refuses, arguing that virtuousness of temperance and chastity, she's going to hold on to these values. And meanwhile, her brothers, they're obviously out there searching for her. They come across this attendant spirit, the so-called attendant spirit, who is the angelical figure, who has been sent to aid them, and who takes the form of a shepherd. Now, again, shepherd has a religious association, shepherd, a Christ-like figure who tells them how to defeat Comas. So Comas is the devil, and the shepherd is a Christ-like figure. So as the lady continues to assert her freedom to mind and to exercise her free will by resistance and even defiance, she is rescued by that attendant spirit along with her brothers. Why? Because she held on to the idea of temperance, of chastity, all those Christian values. So with the song, the spirit conjures the water nymph Sabrina, who frees the lady on account of her steadfast virtue. Because of the woman is virtuous, she is saved by Sabrina. And she and her brothers are reunited with their parents in a triumphal celebration. That is what is happening towards the end. They're celebrating that escape, which signifies the heavenly bliss awaiting the wayfaring soul that prevails over trials. See, so, this is very symbolic of life itself, that you have to, even in the face of adversity, you have to hold on to your virtue. You have to hold on to a principled life. And when you're out of the woods, you will be rewarded for holding on to that, to those values. So this is what, the mass gives out, the message, right? So, is it a good time? 4:45. So I wanted to discuss Paradise Lost, but okay. I'll keep it a little brief. So Paradise Lost is Milton's magnum opus. Magnum opus is a writer's, an artist's greatest work. So this is his greatest work, and it has been composed in blank verse. Right. And I told you in the previous sessions what blank verse was. I reiterated unrhymed iambic pentameter lines. Right. It is unrhymed because there is no rhyme towards the end of the lines, each line. So, and they are iambic pentameter lines. Right. So, and it is an epic poem, and it is a Christian epic. Right. And it was composed by Milton when he had already become blind. When he had already became blind, and he was also already impoverished by that time. So it was around 1658 to 1664 that first edition came out, with a small but significant revisions. A 1674 version also came out, that is the second edition. So it has been argued that the poem reflects his personal despair at the failure of the revolution, that interregnum period. That revolutionary period was had come to an end, and he was very upset about this. And yet he affirms an ultimate optimism in human potential. So what if this project failed? If this dream failed, doesn't mean that, future does not have any, future doesn't have any promises to offer to us. So he is very hopeful for future, that there will be more revolutions for the good. Right. So some literary critics have argued that Milton encoded many references to his unyielding support for the good old cause. The good old cause is obviously bringing off that Commonwealth era, and that is the fight against the rule of King Charles I and on behalf of the Parliament. So this is what it is phrased as the good old cause, right? The parliamentarian regime. So on 27th April 1667, Milton sold the publication right for Paradise Lost to a publisher. And who is this publisher? Samuel Simmons. And for how much did he sell these publication rights? £5. That is as per the 2015 purchasing power. And with a further £5 to be paid if and when each print run sold out, between 1,300 to 1,500 copies. So, imagine had he not given those rights, he would have been, his family, the generations that followed would have accumulated so much of wealth if only he had known what he was writing back then. And, its sequel came out. The sequel of Paradise Lost is Paradise Regained, which was published alongside the tragedy, Samson Agonistes, in 1671. And both of these works also reflect Milton's post-restoration political situation. The way Satan has been shown as a fallen angel, it is actually a very confusing work, so to say. Why is it confusing? Because in his composition, he declares that he is going to justify the ways of God to man. That he's going to justify the position of God, that why he did what he did in creating Adam and Eve and then, sending them out, banishing them from the Garden of Eden. But in this process, if you ever sit and read the work Paradise Lost, the speech of Satan is so impassioned, so it sways you. I remember when I was in my graduation days and I was reading Paradise Lost, and, I spoke to my mentor and I said, his words were so convincing, the argument that he gave to Eve before she tasted the forbidden fruit, that, you should go forth and taste that fruit. That argument was so convincing. And his opening speech was so convincing when, he is actually asking all the fallen angels to gather their strength and wage another war. It was so impassioned and so motivating that, had I been in place of Eve, I would have done the same. This is exactly what I told my mentor. And he said, after all, you're the daughter of Eve. But, this is how the text has been composed. Even though he mentions that, he's going to justify the ways of God to man, in this process, he justifies Satan's way. And the way Satan has been described, the way certain words have been put into Satan's mouth. Satan, he comes up as a very convincing character, a very anti-hero sort of a personality in that text. And God, as a character, he doesn't have many lines, and not many lines. I don't remember, no lines at all, maybe. And no, he does have lines. And he does not come across as a convincing character. So, this is something that even William Blake, a romantic writer, said that, he was in the devil's party without even knowing it. Such a statement was made by William Blake for John Milton. So, critics have debated over this point, and they still continue to debate over this, that what exactly was he trying to do with that text? It is so ambiguous. This is the reason, this is where his ambiguity stems from. So what is he exactly? And because he was a fallen, he had fallen from the political ranks, he was seeing himself as a fallen angel himself. And, somewhere Milton, if you read the two characters, Milton and Satan, you will see parallel between the two characters. So, that actually problematizes the entire understanding of the text, what he was trying to do. It's a very interesting text and a must read. So I think I should take this text tomorrow I want to take it a little, not tomorrow, sorry, next week. Whenever we discuss next, I want to take you through a ride so you understand this text, because I know many of you have not read this. So I think I should stop here. And in case you have any questions, the platform is open.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ash. I really loved this session. I learned about Milton. I didn't know exactly that he played a big role in the history of the English history, and not only in the political history, but also in the language, English language. It's just amazing, and I can't wait to see his writing. I will make some research, because this guy seems to be with the people.
Precisely.
Yes, he was fighting for the people, and
exactly.
And this guy really needs to be,
And understood. Yes.
Yes. Wow.
So yes,
I can't wait the next course to read, but I'm going to read first here in French. He's Paradis Perdu. In French we say Paradise Lost is Paradis Perdu, and I will read that. And wow, it's just amazing. I learned a lot about him. I didn't know that he was for the people. I thought that he was like, this guy very rich and doing his but I learned a lot from you today, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Highness, for acknowledging my work. Yes, he was trying to do a lot. He was looking forward to a better time. And yes, obviously against the tyranny of King Charles I, who had assumed a total control over the state. And those decisions were not going well for the people, and were not going well with the ministers also, because they were not being consulted. So I think there is a very important political message here as well. And yes, the one thing that I learned from Milton is that if you have the fire to bring about a change in the society, it may take time, but then if you push hard, you will get there. So one must never lose hope in future. That is how he saw his own, even though he had failed in his own revolutionary dream, but he did have dreams for the future, for the future to come, and a very promising future to say. And this is exactly how we are moving ahead in these times, in the times of pandemic, that good things will come and we will persevere and we will make the best of whatever we have today. So with this, I end today's session, and we will meet again next week with an understanding of Paradise Lost. So I'm going to be discussing I'm going to be discussing the whole text, not line by line, because it's like a very, very, very thick text, and we can have an endless debate on that. But I would bring to your notice certain facts, about Paradise Lost, and how the text is fashioned, and how it has been critiqued for being anti-feminist. So we'll get into a very interesting discussion in the coming week. So do come, everybody, and thank you for joining today. So I am looking forward to your participation in the next session as well. And thank you so much, Your Highness. You are an absolute sweetheart. And I'm there for you every time you want to understand just about anything about English literature. So
yes. Thank you so much. You are just a wonderful daughter for me, because I'm calling you daughter, and I love you very much. And thank you for supporting the vision and mission of Success World One Academy. You are just giving your time, your energy, and it's a free course to everyone. And it's called the Golden Heart of Humanity. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so yeah, we have to end this session. So we say everybody next week, same hour, same prof and same platform. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye all. Thank you for coming. See you all.
See you all. Bye.